Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of Area 312 Rock and Metal Vodcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kent, along with my co-host,
Rex.
friends, along with Rex and myself. We have some members of the family, some guest co-hosts with us today. Keven Crothers of Heaven's Metal Streaming Radio and White Throne Magazine. Welcome, Keven.
Hello.
Keven, really quick, tell our friends where they can find you online.
Well, there's Heaven's Metal Streaming Radio, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All things hard rock, heavy metal from a Christian point of view. We're on the Live 365 platform, but you can also, there's a couple other platforms you can find us as well. Get Me Radio is one, and there's a few others as well. There's also the Heaven's Metal Streaming Radio YouTube channel. Hasn't been as active, just videos take more time, and occasionally I write reviews for Heaven's Metal Magazine, when you can check us out online there as well.
Thank you, Keven. And so Jeff McCormack, you know him, friends, from MegaJeff's Rock Hard Vinyl. He's also with Heaven's Metal, and he gave us the classic Pendragon magazine back in the day. Welcome back, Jeff. And Jeff, just let our friends know some of the addresses where they can find you online and what you've been up to.
You told me everything. You said everything about me. That's good. I do a YouTube. I do the YouTube channel MegaJeff's Hard Rock, which just basically I show a lot of vinyl records because I have a couple, and that's only about a third of, not even, but quarter of them. But anyway, talk about music and stuff from both Christian and secular of every brand there, and then I occasionally write for Heaven's Metal and stuff like that. Help with the website, things along that line. Help with the different social media pages. Things along that line. So, my history starts back in the 80s with the Pendragon magazine, and then somewhere, what was it? I don't know, Kevin, it was like 20 some odd years ago. Doug roped us all of us old timers in, and we relaunched Heaven's Metal as a different brand from HM magazine, which is what it had become. And so we'd all been on the relaunch of Heaven's Metal now for 20 plus years. So that's most of the heavensmetalmagazine.com. You can find us online. So.
Friends, as well, we have another very special guest host with us. You've probably seen him in one of the many great albums that you purchased, including this one by Damascus, the Anthology, Mr. John DeLaurentis. He's a copy editor for a lot of our releases that we get, copy editing, and he does write-up reviews. And so, and also back in the day, he gave us Rock Tower magazine. John DeLaurentis, welcome. Just tell our friends a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Well, basically, in terms of the music, I'm doing copy editing for Girder Music, for Rox Productions, and for Retroactive Records. So that keeps me very busy because there's lots and lots of projects. But music, I grew up in the church. I grew up, actually, I'll just give you one little quick thing. How I got into Christian music, like listening to it, because I was always a music fan. I grew up in the 70s, listening to all the classic rock bands when they came out. But someone had given me, they found out I was a Christian, and they gave me an album called Fireworks, Live Fireworks. And that was the one that kind of launched me into Christian music. So I've been listening since then. And then I started, this is my Rock Tower. This is the one with Damascus on the cover. Which is very small scale, but I did also do some freelance writing for Doug Lampelt and Heaven's Metal. So I interviewed a bunch of bands for Heaven's Metal, and I worked for White Throne too. I did primarily reviews. I didn't do, White Throne was I loved that magazine. It was good. And Heaven's Metal, I read them and all these. I loved all those magazines growing up, finding out about it. And that's how I found out about Damascus through one of, I don't know which one it was, but I saw an ad for it, and that's how I first discovered Damascus and got their cassettes when they came out. So I've been a lifelong Christian music fan, and now I'm very happy to be able to continue it with the copy editing and then writing some of the text for some of these releases too as well.
Well, very cool, and we're honored to have you too, John. And friends, without further ado, since 1983. The band Damascus has delivered four full-length albums plus one EP of driving progressive rock. Now, their fifth album, it was completed especially for this year's 2024's Road to Damascus Anthology released on Rocks Records. Friends from the band Damascus, we have principal songwriter Tom McKeown. Welcome, Tom. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Wow, I feel like I'm with royalty here. So many names that from my past that had such a major influence on what I did and in the support that they gave. I feel very blessed to be here. So thank you.
It's an honor to have you. And Tom, we always like to start off at square one, and I have much to learn. And I'm delighted that I am here today, able to talk to you. I've really enjoyed this anthology and want to thank John DeLaurentis for kind of tipping Rex and I off about this. And so want to find out, Tom, about your musical history and that led to this great anthology and beyond. Tom, whenever you were growing up, was there music in your home, whether coming from the radio or perhaps you had family members who perform music?
In my family, my older sister did play piano a little bit. She was forced to. She gave that up pretty quickly. So really, my mom played the organ and my dad played the radio. And my mom would play like Baby Elephant Walk, things like that. She had her big Hammond organ in the living room, and she loved to play that. And so I always heard music like that, and we always had a piano hanging around. And I was just fascinated with noises and making noises out of everything. And that continues to this day.
Well, very cool. Tom, from the anthology, you're known for your keys and also the mode, as well as guitar. So you play all these things in Damascus. Who were some of your specific musical influences, as in maybe some other artists? And then were you self-taught or did you take lessons?
Well, it was kind of interesting. I really started getting heavily into music when I was 10. I asked for a guitar, and my parents didn't have much money, but they saved up enough money to get me a pretty horrible guitar, somewhat unplayable, but I was still just fascinated with that, and I instantly started writing songs. And I did take, I don't know, about 6 months worth of lessons. Surprisingly, I knew of somebody from church that was teaching guitar lessons, like One Tin Soldier and old folk kind of songs. And it ends up being Mark Reich from Damascus. It was his older sister. And so she gave me my first guitar lessons. And then I took some lessons from a jazz guitar player for another 6 months, maybe. And that was about it. And so all through from 10 through high school and the college years, I played mainly guitar and drums. And I had a band named Hayes at that point. That was through the high school years. And even through college, we start out, like very much Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, very heavy rock. After I found Christ, after a horrific car accident, I started switching and growing my musical styles. And at that point, I was very much into Kansas, even though I didn't play keyboards at the point. And I don't know how much you want me to go in further, but that's how I started getting into keyboards, was through listening to more progressive music. Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Genesis, and especially Kansas. I was a huge Kerry Livgren fan.
there's a few songs in here. In fact, I was telling Kevin, there's some stuff explicitly that, because I'm a huge Kansas fan myself, it reminds me of some of the works on Mask from that album. I was picking up some stuff. But let me ask you then, going back, because you mentioned your band, was it called Golden Haze at one point and then just Haze?
Yes, it was.
And so, go ahead, Tom.
What I was gonna say, it's a dopey name, because just like most people, I looked through the library at high school. When I was in high school, I was looking through the library on the spines of all the books. What's a good name? And there was some book named Golden Haze. We were like, oh, let's go with Golden Haze. And then after a little while, people were like, nah, it's not really all that great. And then we're thinking in Jimi Hendrix, just make it Haze. Instead of golden, instead of purple, now it's just Haze. So it just got shortened to Haze.
Well, sure. You mentioned playing bands like Led Zeppelin and Haze, Tom. At that time, was it all covers or did you do some originals as well?
We were half and half through the high school years. It was half and half. I've always had a hard time with playing other people's music. I don't know if it's ego or if it's I feel like I have something to say musically and lyrically, and I just wanted to develop my own thing. I never wanted to be a copy of somebody else, and that's been a prime theme of my life, I would say, is that I really have a hard time just like imitating somebody. I know there's a lot of bands out, and there's a lot of cover bands that make a good living playing somebody else's music, but I could just never do that.
And I certainly I can understand and appreciate what you're saying. Now, let me ask you, Tom. And you alluded to, I want to ask you about when you came to Christ, when your journey with Christ began. So consider that question on the table there. I also want to ask then what happened at that Res Band concert on December the 12th of 1981. So 2 questions there.
Yeah, I think 1981, 80 and 81 were very big years for changes in my life. And I was in the band Haze, and we were on our way to Wisconsin to see another band play. We just finished up with our rehearsals. It was late at night. We hopped in our drummer's van and we took off, and we were heading up north. And it was just a very odd thing. There was a kind of shelving thing in the back of the van where we stacked gear. That's, the drums fit underneath that, and guitar amps and stuff like that packed on top of it. I was laying down on top of it, and we were driving, and I remember we were getting on the highway, and I was like, it just came to me, we are not going to make it. We're just not going to make it. I don't know what that premonition was. That could have been, obviously I believe it had to be coming from God. And just a few moments later, I heard the guys in the band yelling at our driver, to stop. Didn't stop, and all of a sudden, the van flipped, and I didn't know what was going on, and we were very messed up. And we were, it ended up being that our driver was high and missed a red light, ran it, broadsided a family that was on their way back from a party. They had to revive a young child. It was horrific. There was blood everywhere. And I remember being in the hospital and just being stunned and just being in a daze. And through that process, started wondering, why am I here? What is this all about? And it was kind of a sobering thing. And I went into a pretty deep despair and depression for many months. just not knowing that answer and knowing why I was there. Why had Hayes not taken off the way I thought it was going to be? Why were we not instantly world famous? I was given a recording contract when I was a sophomore in high school, and my parents, you know, rightly forced me to reject the contract because it was, you know, it was worse than slave labor. And so I thought everything was a dead end, and I was super depressed. And my friend Mark, who had played in Hayes earlier, but then went away to school, he had just come back from college, and he invited me to go see a band named Res Band. Now, if you asked me if I was a Christian at the time, I've said, of course, I've been to church my entire life. My parents took me to a Methodist church. They would take me there and drop me off, and along with my 4 other brothers and sisters. And I was very involved in the youth group. So I figured I'm a Christian. I'm a good guy or whatever, which all were false. But he invited me to see this Res Band, and I think it was at I can't remember. It was someplace in Chicago, and I went specifically to mock them because I was like, "What is this Jesus stuff? This got to be the dopiest thing ever." So I went along with him, basically to have a little laugh. And Mark was a Christian. Through high school, his dad led a Bible study. I would go to the Bible study and I would sleep. I know that sounds terrible, but I got to be known kind of as the guy that comes to this Bible study and sleeps. I was bored out of my mind. It just didn't connect with me. I was at the concert. At the end, Glenn Kaiser gives an altar call. And that night, you know, he asked, you know, if you want to accept Christ tonight. He rattled off, like, are you involved in this, and this? Is this the way your life is? And it was like reading my life story. And it was like I thought he was talking specifically to me. And so when he invited anyone who wants to accept Christ to raise their hand, I couldn't help but to raise my hand at that point because I knew my life was going nowhere and borderline suicidal. And at that moment, it was a total transformation. I know some people come to know Christ and it's a slow growth thing and it happens over years. For me, it felt like a ton of bricks. It was just like, bam, it just hit me. And that made me start rethinking my whole entire life at that point. I was working at a chain of record stores at that point, and one of the people I worked with is the girlfriend of the drummer from Steve Walsh's band, Streets. When Steve Walsh left Kansas, he started Streets. His drummer's girlfriend was my coworker, and she said, "Hey, Steve has left Kansas. Maybe you should head down to Georgia. I can set this up and you can have an audition with the band." At that point, I didn't play keyboards. I was mainly a guitar player, which was never going to work out anyway. But at that point in time, in my mind, this was a distinct possibility. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I asked God, what should I do? Is there any possibility for me in music anymore? And I remember I was in my bedroom, just praying in my bedroom, on my knees, asking God, what should I be doing? And this was the only time in my life where I felt like God spoke to me nearly audibly, but it wasn't audible, but I want you to take your music and continue, but write for me. And at that moment, I knew that life had changed. I almost immediately called up Cliff Zwybrook, who was the bass player in Hayes. And I went over to his house. I said, Cliff, I got to talk to you. I went over to his house and I said, hey, Cliff, I've got to leave Hayes because I don't feel like I can continue with the direction that we're heading at this point. You know, there's the car accident. There was a fair amount of drinking. You know, we weren't too much into drugs, but I wanted to change direction. And I told him, you know, about this conversion, this finding Christ. And he said, I'm so glad you came over because I was just going to call you because the same thing just happened to me. He had been on a mission trip to Appalachia.
Wow.
And he said he went on the mission trip through the church that we were at. He went on it to help the poor people in Appalachia. Instead, the poor people showed him Christ, and his life was forever changed. So he was leaving the band anyway, and I was leaving the band, and I was like, well, why don't we go with this new direction together? And he said, yeah. So the next week we were in rehearsal with the rest of the guys from Hayes, and I came to them and I said, here's the story. We can continue as this, but I'm going in this direction, and here's where my songs are going to be going. This is what I'm going to write about. That was it. They just packed up their gear, and the other guys were gone. Hayes was over, and I knew that was going to happen. It was not going to continue the way it was. And Mark had just gotten back from college, and so we contacted Mark and said, Mark, are you interested in joining what we're doing? And we explained what we were about at that point, and about this newfound faith that we had. We were on fire, and he agreed that he wanted to be part of that as well. And then we had to find a drummer, put an ad out in the papers, and also there was a music store called the Sound Post in Mount Prospect that we hung out at a lot and bothered the people that worked there. And so we put up a note, you know, with our numbers and stuff like that. And eventually Dave Coy contacted us, and that was how we got together as that band. I immediately bought an organ, being such a Kansas fan, and that was the beginning of where Damascus started.
Tell us about maybe exactly when you consider the band first forming, the year, and then what made you specifically choose the name Damascus?
I always think of the band starting in 81, December of 81, because Cliff and I started the band almost immediately after I came to Christ. And Mark joined very soon after. And I think we had Dave by February or so. But looking at it, we were trying to go through a million names for the band, and I wasn't going to go back to the library. I did that once. So reading through the Bible and studying about the Apostle Paul, the first place that he proclaimed the gospel was Damascus. And I thought to myself, this is the first place that I'm going to be preaching the gospel from. And so it seemed that Damascus was a fitting name, and that's where that came from.
Gotcha. It makes perfect sense. Tom, what exactly then drew you? Prog is such a niche form of rock music. Its heyday was roughly in the 70s and maybe the earlier 80s when you had the streamlined Yes with 90125 in Kansas at
Absolutely.
that time, Vinyl Confessions, Drastic Measures. The proggy side is a very niche, I'm just going to use the term market, forgive that term, a very niche genre. How about that? You guys were prog through and through. So what drew you to the prog and made it stick with you? And then maybe give us some of your favorite prog albums that have really meant something to you.
Well, the reason why I went with Prog was because I didn't want to sell any albums. I wanted to be out in obscurity the rest of my life.
And only
And
guys come to the concert.
it it was really just through the growth of music and learning more about music. In high school, I took a lot of harmony and theory courses. In college, I took some more arrangement courses and poetry classes. And so just naturally, as I understood music more, I wanted to be more involved in music that was challenging. And after playing Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin stuff, it became exceedingly boring, at least for me. You know, it's nice to play power chords, and I've lost enough hearing from that. But I wanted to do something more interesting, and so I really dove in deep into classical music. I'm a huge Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff fan. I've had to listen to symphonies 4, 5, and 6 of Tchaikovsky hundreds of times. To me, that's the pinnacle of music. The Sixth Symphony of Tchaikovsky eclipses every other piece of music. I know most people will say it's Bach. For me, it was Tchaikovsky. I am not a noodly guy. I'm into the melodies, and that's something that happens in the music that pulls at your heart, and that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to learn how to do that. And so, as you could probably hear on many of the early Damascus things, a lot of things were almost like um, finger exercises, as far as like, I need to learn how to play organ in this particular way. And so I'd write songs that were incorporating this particular style, and I would learn how to play from that because I didn't want to learn how to play anybody else's music. And I remember reading about when Kerry Livgren wrote Dust in the Wind. Dust in the Wind was his finger exercises to learn how to do Travis picking. And his wife thought that was beautiful. And he was like, no, this is just an exercise. But a lot of Damascus stuff started as finger exercises for me to learn how to play. And it just kind of grew from there. Um, I was very influenced by classical music, mostly Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff's Isle of the Dead, insanely deep, and it's just such a beautiful piece. Um, I I loved a lot of Yes. One of my favorite was probably the least favorite Yes album ever, which was Drama. That was my one of my favorite albums by Yes was Drama. Of course, when 90125 came out, it was like, wow, things have taken a complete left turn when Trevor Rabin joined the band. Um, and so that also had an influence on me. All the early Kansas, up through probably as much as I liked Vinyl Confessions and Drastic Measures, they didn't compete against the earlier albums. I really loved the earlier albums. Song for America. Um, I remember I would listen at night. I'd had headphones. I just lay in bed and just listen to an entire album of whoever it was because I worked in a record store. So I got all these records for free, basically, because I would bring them back the next day. I'd take them home, listen to them for a few days, bring them back, try something else. And so I got a huge knowledge of music that way. So a lot of Emerson, Lake and Palmer trilogy. I listened to a lot. Tarkus, um, Genesis, Selling England by the Pound. Um, that was the kind of stuff that I was way into. And so all my earlier things like Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin, I didn't even listen to that anymore at all. It was like God moved in a different direction spiritually, and my thoughts spiritually were deeper, and I wanted my music to be deeper as well. Does that explain it?
In a great way. Little rock and roll trivia here, okay, for anybody. The Yes album Drama, who was the lead singer, and what was the band he was in prior to Yes? Anyone?
Too easy.
He was in the Buggles before,
Yeah.
but I can't remember the guy's name. I'm sorry.
Oh, you have to remember his name.
He was the other Trevor.
I
Not
named my
Trevor
son
Horn.
after him.
Trevor Horn.
Trevor Horn.
Yes.
Trevor Horn. And Jeff Downs was the other guy, right?
Yes.
It was Trevor
Yes.
Horn and Jeff Downs. That were the Buggles.
Buggles.
Yep. I have all the Buggles albums as well.
Very cool. They were Video Killed the Radio star, were they not?
They were.
Yes, yes.
And TV video.
Tom, circa 1987, with Damascus, you performed at Cornerstone. I believe you were on the Timeless album tour at that time. Tell us about being on the road then with Damascus. How often would you all play out? Good memories. Just tell us about being on the road and how long you all did that.
We played on the road, and I think our last real big tour was probably 90, early 90, after when Soon the Doors Will Open, when that came out. That was our last tour because Mark left the band right after that album came out. I mean, he left the day of the tour. But on the Timeless tour, we were touring more heavily. A lot of the college circuit kind of thing. A lot of we'd play in. We always had a place. I think it was like the Mainstream Coffee House in Fort Wayne. For anybody way back then who remembers that, I don't know what it was. It was a small place, but whenever we played there, the place was packed. And there was other places that we played around the country. We stayed mainly Midwest. We never got out like to New York or anywhere beyond regional. We probably in a 5-6 state region.
Wow.
We had a lot of fun traveling. We learned a lot. You really got to want to move gear if you want to be in a band. I often say that, if you want to be in a band, you need to have a good back and you need to know something about car repair because you're going to need them both. And we always rented 24-foot Ryder trucks, and we filled the Ryder truck up front to back. And it was the four of us guys plus about a 4-member crew. And we would go on the road. Cliff was extremely diabetic. So we had a lot of interesting moments where this was all before cell phones. This is we're driving down the road and all of a sudden we notice that Cliff's car is not behind us because it'd be me and Mark or me and Dave in the truck driving to the show and everybody else loaded up in a car and Cliff would be gone. And we'd be like, uh-oh, what happened? He'd be having some diabetic problems, He'd have to get food right then, and they'd just stop and pull over. And I remember one show, and it could have been in the Fort Wayne thing where we got there, we set up the gear, we're all ready to play, but Cliff isn't there. And I think we did blues in A, B, C, D, and E as we were waiting for him to show up, just to stall for time. looking back on Damascus, as much as I hope and I pray that we had an influence and on people and that we led people to Christ, sometimes God has put it on my heart that he put us in that for us. He put me in Damascus and had us go through that stuff to grow me, not just to grow other people. It's because I needed as much help and as much saving as anybody else. And he showed his grace to me through all the ups and downs and all the trials. And we tried so hard to make it work and just to become as famous and as popular as we could possibly be because we wanted to reach more people. But it was a very homegrown thing. Very we were broke. We were broke. And we could not get labels to back us. We had so many meetings with labels and with management. And at that point in time, it was a lot of, if you guys would sound like these guys over here, we could do something with you. Or if you'll go and be like these guys here, they name whatever the popular secular band was at the time. During that 80s point, Christian music in the Christian industry, they were really looking for the Christian version of the popular secular bands, but not progressive. And we just didn't want to do that. I just couldn't do it. And so we just thought, no, we're going to stick to our guns and we're going to continue on. And we're going to make this as much as we can possibly make of it. And that's how we continued.
I greatly appreciate your artistic integrity, Tom, and being true to who the Lord called you to be. Thank you for that, because we're reaping the rewards even today. Now, John, I want to ask you and Keven and Jeff. I know, Keven, because you showed me Damascus was featured back in the day in White Throne magazine, I believe. And John, you did a spread, if I'm not mistaken, an exclusive with Damascus for your Rock Tower magazine. So guys, and Jeff, I think you might have seen Damascus at Cornerstone. Tell me about these issues featuring Damascus and Tom, and about seeing them live, guys.
Yeah, I never saw them live, so I'll defer to Keven and Jeff.
I never saw them live either, John. So what did you have? I think Jeff here is the only one of us who has actually seen Damascus live.
Thank you.
But
Yes.
Jeff, I have to apologize right away, Jeff. If you saw us at Cornerstone, I apologize for the first note of the first song.
Yeah, I read in the write-up, and it reminded of the technical issues. I don't know if I remembered that or not. I was just thrilled to be there because it was my first Christian, event of big stature like that. So, and I was familiar with the band. I probably had the cassette at the time. I just know I was trying to see everybody I could, even though I ended up hanging out with too many people that you meet, and then we end up not going to concerts that I really thought I wanted to go to. Like I think I missed the Whiteheart show. Anyway, I saw the big ones, but the big draw that year for us metalheads was this band Bloodgood that was running up the charts, and then this new band White Cross that we had never heard of. And so I think I just somehow stumbled upon you all playing on one of the side stages. I was like, oh, okay, I know these guys from the cassette. So I don't, I remember what it looked like, and I remember the show in general. But I don't have a lot of details. I'm sorry, it's been too many years ago.
I still think it's cool that you saw them back in the day, though, Jeff.
Yeah,
That's
and I think, and at that point, I don't even think I was involved in my own magazine, so I'm not sure. I probably was just involved in reading Heaven's Metal and getting magazines at that time, because I think I got into Heaven's Metal probably in the first 4 or 5 issues, and so I was there from the early days, and then later White Throne and everything there. So. Yeah, I guess I knew White Throne by then because, like I said, I ran into Dave Johnson. He gave me some. We did some bootlegging cassette exchanges. Got some Guardian and Deliverance shows and stuff. And Yeah, that I found the most exciting was just running into people that we knew from other magazines. Ran into Doug Van Pelt, ran into the guys from at that time Second Chance. Later they became Armageddon and Taker. Was hanging out with those guys, and so it was just a thrill to be there. But then to go see all the bands, even the smaller name bands like Damascus, was like it was just cool. It was just really a great experience. So that's about all I can remember about it.
Kent had asked me, "Hey, we're going to do this thing with Damascus," and I was like, "Okay." And when Bill Bafford had said, "Hey, we're releasing this," I'm going, "I remember Damascus." I keep thinking we reviewed them in White Throne, and in White Throne #3, there is a review for Timeless here, and it was reviewed by a man named Bob Felberg. Bob lived out in Connecticut and actually did a Christian rock radio show back then. And he what I found was kind of funny when I read through the review. He liked it, but he said the songs felt shorter and the songs on the earlier stuff were longer, and that I'm going. But I look at the times on the CD. I'm going, gee, Bob, there's only one song that's really long, which is a Lost Prayer, I believe. And so good review for there. And then Jamie Lee Rake did a review for, this was in White Throne #6, and this came out in 80. Oh gosh, I should have left it open. Another good review for, if I can find it. But to me, the question I had, Tom, was you guys were really playing a brand of prog that in 1975, 1977 would have been huge, because when I listen to it, I hear Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I hear Yes. And yes, guys, I was not a huge Kansas fan because I just didn't hear that much of them back then. But what did you get as far as feedback just from people in general, because you're playing something not just because you guys were Christians, but because the musical style was so different from what everybody else was doing. How did that,
Well, there was good and bad. There was the smaller group of people that got it, and you just pray that you'll find enough people that get what you're doing.
Right.
No matter what you do as an artist, but you want some people that gather around you and they understand it. And we had, not masses, but we had enough that it sustained us, and they encouraged us. We got lots and lots of letters from people around the world, and that helped out a lot. But we also had a lot of negative things because of the music. This was not typical, but we were invited to play at a Christian school, a Christian college at one point, and we played. And after we got finished playing, it's going to sound odd, but the pastor sat me down and said, "You're putting too much energy into this music. You need to simplify it because the message is the only thing that's important." And I was like, I can't do it.
Right.
And so we would get some accolades, and then you'd have somebody that, you were hoping that they would get it and they would understand it, say, "No, you're putting too much energy into the music." And for us, we liked the stuff that came out, from ELP and Genesis and
Right.
stuff in the late 70s, and we thought a lot of those bands we felt lost their way, when they became more commercial successes, or they streamlined a bit more and they cut their hair or whatever. And, you know, we were naive enough to think that there was still going to be enough of a population that loved the older stuff that it was going to be good for us. And had we stuck around, by 90, 94, 95, 96, bands like Porcupine Tree and Spock's Beard, and Flower Kings, they all started coming around, and it was like we were right in the center of the dead spot for progressive music.
Right. The other review was for Soon the Doors Will Open. And that was, thank you, John. So it was another good review. I think for both reviewers, they got it, but because it was so different than, you know, everything else, because yes, Rush changed, Kansas obviously changed, Yes obviously changed. And there wasn't much in the way of prog stuff from, you know, the 70s, whereas now it's very popular, I think, once again, in prog circles. There are so many bands like the ones you just named. So
yeah, that was, I think, my why I loved the Damascus cassettes for all these years since they came out, because I was a huge prog rock fan. I mean, I grew up listening to Kansas, to ELP, to Saga, all of those bands, and I loved progressive rock. To this day, I still, you know, I love it, and that's why I was like, all these years later, I think when I first contacted Tom, I was like, I still, to this day, I'm listening to these albums, and I said I always wanted to see them released, you know, commercially on CD, and that's when I approached Bill Baffert about it. He had no idea who they were. He never heard of them before. Yeah. Scott Waters, who I work with as the layout designer for the, never heard of them before. So I said, you have to hear this music, because this music has been blessing me for all these years, and I still listen to it regularly because I'm such a prog rock fan. And I'm thankful to Bill Baffert. He was very open to it. He said, go ahead, pursue it. So that's brought to realization.
Well, and that's wonderful. And so, John, tell us, because your Rock Tower magazine, when did you begin that? And then tell us when your featured article on Damascus was. And I apologize, you had so many pictures, I thought you had seen them live, but just tell us about that and when you featured Damascus. And
yeah, I guess the Rock Tower started off like as just an outgrowth of my love for Christian music. And then at the time, I remember writing articles about, I wanted to see Christian music start being released on CD, because I was at the very beginning of the CD, because I think I got my first CD player in 1984, because I grew up on vinyl. So when I had gotten a guy who was that I knew from a church I met, who did some graphics for me, because I started out kind of like really like very basic, just like typed up things. I mean, these were typed up on a typewriter, old school, not on a computer. So, and I had someone that I met through a church who was a graphic designer. And so he did that's when I switched the name to Rock Tower, which came after The Lord is My Rock and My High Tower from the Psalms. And I named it that because I think it was originally under Father Light Ministries is what I had originally had it as the title of. So then I said, I want to start doing more interviews with bands and things of that nature. So I started reaching out, and I was doing, I interviewed a couple more of the lesser known bands. So I did Damascus. This issue is 1991. So that would have been soon the doors were open, had come out at that point. So I had done that one, and I did that. And I think I had covered a thrash metal band named Immortal that you might remember, some of you might remember back in the day. And there was an instrumental guy named Dave Patrick I covered too. I don't know what happened to him. So I did that, and then I eventually kind of went from there into freelance writing. So when I did that, I kind of like phased out the Rock Tower because it was never really that like big of, big distribution. So I started, I contacted, I think White Throne I started with first. I started doing some reviews for them. And then when I approached Doug Lampelt, he said, I would like to do some freelance. He opened up the door for me to do some pretty cool interviews, which is interesting how life circles around us. One of the interviews I did for Heaven's Metal was Ultimatum, which is Scott Waters' band. And then 20 years later, after, or so, I'm working with Scott for the label as a layout designer. So I said, see how God works? I interviewed all those years ago, and then I went into that. So that was, that was my connection. And I basically stuck with that, writing, freelancing for those magazines for a number of years. And then, I reached out to Greg Hayes of Girder Music, mainly because some of the releases, I was so excited that they were coming out with all these great releases on CD. But because I'm an English teacher, by profession, I kept seeing mistakes. So I reached out to Greg and I said, well, if you ever need a copy editor, because there's this mistake, that mistake with stuff, because I'm kind of like that. I'm like very meticulous with things, with grammar and proper writing. So he took me on, and that was, it led from that to working with Matt with Retroactive, and then working with Bill with Rock's production. So.
Well, it's interesting to note, and full confession here, coming back to the anthology. So, John, you have a complete write-up in here about Damascus for this wonderful collection. I can finally read it now. The reason why I haven't read it inside, I didn't want to be influenced by anything for this interview. I wanted my questions to be fully formed out of my heart and mind. But friends out there, I do want to say this is a wonderful collection and very thick book. Wonderful write-up from John. And so what this includes here, and you can get this at roxrecords.com, but here on the anthology, this has the Damascus EP from 1983, Will I Find You There, the full album from 84, the full album of Timeless from 87, the full album of Soon the Doors Will Open from 1990, as well as finally, and Tom, I'm sure you can appreciate this, the completed album, which was never released, to The Turning Tide, which the fifth album never released, just released this year in 2024. So, Tom, getting back to you with this great anthology, friends, go to Rox Records and pick it up. It's a great value for all of those albums, and it's wonderfully presented. Sounds wonderful. Tom, when was the material initially conceived for the Turning Tide album? And was it partially recorded back then and finally completed, or where was it at during its dormant stage of waiting?
Well, it existed as cassettes, various cassettes that I had laying around from rehearsals. We started working on it. We had an 8-track machine. We'd bought one at that point. The year before we started working on the Mark left, I believe, in 90. Right after Soon the Doors Will Open, we did one tour with Mark, and when we were packing up to leave for the tour, he said he was leaving. He took a job in Oregon, and so we knew that was over, and we decided to carry on as a 3-piece. We moved out of the church that we had been rehearsing in for 10 years or 11 years, and we built a studio in Cliff's garage. And so we were working on all the material, and we were writing it. Everything that's on there was written for that album, and it was written at that point in time. but they were in very, very rough form. And in 93, beginning of 93, Dave decided that he'd had enough. It was too depressing. You know, we couldn't make inroads. And at that point, it was just burnout. And so he left, and we knew it was over at that point. And that material sat untouched for, I think, 2011 was the first time I took a look at it ever again. I tried to digitize everything at that point. The original 8-track recordings were all gone. The 8-track machine we had was it had broke. It was unrepairable. Couldn't play back the material. All I had was cassettes of these ideas. And so what I did is whatever I had that was listenable, I took as is. Whatever, there's some songs on there that are actually boombox recordings. I know it sounds crazy, but we would have a boombox in rehearsal because each of us would want to take home a cassette of the songs that we were working on through that rehearsal so we could perfect our parts. So when we come back, we'd be a bit better. And we rehearsed like 3 nights a week. And so all I had was like boombox recordings of a few of these songs. And I took those boombox recordings, you know, just like what the Beatles did recently with being able to separate parts, you know, to get a John Lennon song redone that was impossible to do before. I did the same kind of thing to be able to remix many of these songs and get them playable. Would I love to redo them all? Of course, I'd love to have them like in their fully formed self or state, but there just wasn't time. And the only song that's on the album that I actually sang on new was Unfinished Business. That was the last song we wrote. We had no words for it. We went around and around and around and around for weeks and weeks and weeks without any words for it. But I had recordings of it, but it was just cassette recordings like everything else. And so when this was coming down, and Bill had said that he'd be interested in releasing that unreleased 5th album, I thought, I am going to take off work and I am gonna try to get some lyrics on this thing and build it up as best I can with what we had so that piece could be finished as well. And that's what happened. Like I said, I would love to be able to go back and redo all the songs again. But honestly, I'm considerably older at this point, and just like Steve Perry from Journey, I can't hit some of those notes anymore. No matter how tight my clothes are.
In my opinion, as a consuming fan, I think this is a wonderful presentation visually, and I've really enjoyed what I heard audibly. And I've listened to both CDs. Friends, it's a dual, 2 CDs worth of music out there, 5 albums worth. I think it's a wonderful presentation audibly and visually. Thomas, what are your thoughts of having this final package? Are you pleased with the outcome after all these years?
I'm beyond blessed. Sometimes I just can't believe that it happened. I thought that chapter of my life was gone and closed and would never be opened again. And then when John contacted me out of the blue, I don't know. I was stunned. It was one of those God moments where it's like, what are you doing, God? I thought I thought life was in a different place. And and Bill and John and Scott have just blessed me and the rest of the guys in the band so much that it's impossible to say just how much of a blessing it's been. Um, we believed in the music. We poured our lives into it. It was everything to us at that point. That ministry and the music was our world. And to have it be able to be heard again and to have such a fine artwork done on it. Scott did just an amazing job on it. And John went through and fixed all my grammatical errors on every one of those songs, which was a lot. I would go off the top of my head trying to remember the lyrics, and I'd scribble them down, and then John would write me something a couple of days later and say, "I think you got your lyrics wrong." And so it was just we're thoroughly blessed. It's incredible. God is good.
John, I want to give you props because you knew that Rex and I were Kansas fans and fans of Prog, and
Yeah.
thank you for reaching out to us because, again, I'm very tickled that I was introduced to Damascus all these years later. Very pleased with my purchase. Wonderful album, friends, a great value. Roxrecords.com. So, Tom, you weren't finished with music though. The Lord wasn't finished. You're His vessel. And tell us a little bit then about your current endeavors to include Shadowfields. It's kind of Americana folk rock. Tell us about Shadowfields and Undoubting Thomas and A Garden of Souls. How do they differentiate between the three?
Well, thanks. Thanks for bringing those up. Um, After Damascus ended, I raised my children. I I I completely put everything into storage. I sold almost all my keyboards to buy a house. Obviously, my keyboards weren't enough to buy the house. They would be today if I still had those same keyboards, but I sold them when they were not as wanted as they are in these days. Um, but late in '97, I believe it was, I was asked if I would lead worship at a church, the church that I had been attending with my wife and kids. And they asked me if I would just sit in and lead worship a little bit. And a man named Gary Collins, he was a very famous author and psychologist. He encouraged me. We were great friends, and he encouraged me to take that on. For 20 years, I led worship at two different churches for 20 years. At the second church, when I started at the second church, um, I had sat down with the worship team one day between services. And I said, I'm thinking I want to get back into writing music again. Is there anybody here that'd be interested in writing music? Nobody said a word. It was one of those like crickets moments where you think that everybody go, man, if I could write songs with you, Tom, my life would be complete. But that's not what happened. It was silence. And so I went home kind of dejected. But the next week, an alto on the worship team, Heather Humphrey, came up and said, I talked with my husband, Dennis, and he said, it's time for me and I can do this. And so we began working in 2006. And we started writing for publishers, just as songwriters, not necessarily, for publishers, we weren't writing Christian music. We wrote a lot of music for the church that we were at. I don't know, few dozen songs for church and for weddings and all kinds of things in various styles. And we wrote for publishers. And from that, it ended up becoming Shadowfields over time. After we had a solid, steady band, we changed the name it was Humphrey McKeown, but people thought we were a law firm. And so we decided to change that. Well, we thought it'd be interesting to Lennon McCartney, John Taupin, but Humphrey McKeown, it was too much of a law firm. So we decided to change it to Shadowfields. And us both being Christians, we looked at lives are like shadows. And so it's just like what we write is like a field of lives. We're writing about different stages of life, from the good, the bad, uh, things that happen to us, things we've heard about. Um, we've written probably 300 songs together, Heather and I, and we're on our 8th album at this point. Um, we started doing something called A Garden of Souls. We have a whole backlog of a catalog of material that we haven't released for it, that we wrote for it. That is more of the stuff that we wrote for church, but it just we just haven't had time to finish it off and get it out. We have a couple songs up for that, and I think we have a YouTube station or a channel for A Garden of Souls. And then just a couple years ago, I started taking a look at some of the material that I had written that it wasn't for Damascus, it was after Damascus, that I started writing in a more progressive hard rock vein. And I wanted to come up with something to do. And that's how Undoubting Thomas came out. And so I started this project called Undoubting Thomas. John can tell you more in a second, but I really started diving back into that. So I'm kind of juggling Shadowfields and A Garden of Souls and Undoubting Thomas all at the same time, and it's been an exciting time.
Yeah, with Undoubting Thomas, there's I think 2 songs that are up on your. There's a YouTube for Undoubting Thomas, and I think a Facebook page. I think
Mhm.
for Undoubting Thomas. So there's 2 phenomenal songs. So if you like the Damascus stuff, I would say check those 2 out. But I liked it so much that I talked to Bill Baffert about it, and I said, "Would you be interested in?" Because Tom had told me that he was writing more music in that vein, like to do a complete album for Undoubting Thomas. So I approached Bill Baffert and I said, "Would you be interested in maybe releasing an Undoubting Thomas album once Tom is completely finished with it next year in 2025?" So he gave the green light for it. So you hear it here first, officially, that we got the green light for that. So that will be coming out on Rock Records. I don't have no idea when, but sometime in 2025. Bill gave the green light and said that, yeah. So I'm excited for that, to hear more of this, the prog rock stuff coming from Tom. Because I truly think he mentions Kerry Livgren, and that's Tom's music has touched me as much as Kerry Livgren's music. I think he's a brilliant songwriter, and I think he's got a phenomenal sense of phenomenal melodic sense, and I just love an sense of arrangement too. So, like I said, that was the whole impetus behind the whole project of Damascus, getting it out there, because I was so blessed by it myself all these years. So I'm excited for what he's coming. Now, there is also a Christmas song of Damascus that's on the new compilation from Rock's Records. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, Tom? There's one song on that.
I did a rework of Good Christian Men Rejoice, and I had always done that when I led worship. I always wanted to take older hymns and do something really phenomenal with them and add, a bridge or whatever. And I did that same kind of thing on this. But when I was approached about, adding something for the Christmas thing, I wanted it to be at least somewhat Damascus. So I invited the guys from Damascus to be part of it. I wrote and arranged and recorded all the music, but I was able to get Cliff and Dave over to sing vocals on this choir section. We had just a wonderful time fellowship together. We hadn't seen each other in years and years. So we got a pizza, sat around the table. Somewhere there's some video of that, and then they came into the studio and we uh, recorded their parts. Mark is now in Atlanta. He has no access to recording gear. And so I'm like, Mark, I just need something. I need to hear your voice on this song. So he listened with earbuds from one phone, playing back the recording of it, and he sang a voice note into the next phone. And he did it just like in a regular room. So what I got back was like literally a cell phone recording. And then I had to try to doctor that cell phone recording so that it would sound, equal to a $10,000 vocal chain that I'm using for everybody else, which is a little tough to do. But because of that, we're able to pull this thing together. And, Mark is singing a verse on his own. And it's just wonderful. It's like kind of like it wrapped the whole package together for me. John, I just can't thank you enough. You just have blessed my life beyond measure. And it was such a fun thing to put that together. And I will probably post it somewhere as well, because I know it was a limited run on that CD for the Christmas CD. But for anybody who doesn't get the CD, I will definitely post it somewhere where you can hear it as well.
Regarding an online presence, we talked about, Tom, that people can look up Undoubting Thomas on YouTube. I believe that the website for Damascus is, in fact, right here, damascus.band. Is that still correct?
That is correct. I put that together because I figured when this came out, people might want to know a little bit more about us. And I wanted to have a place that I could put things in. If people had questions, I would add onto the website, and or I would answer questions myself, and keep that going.
Yeah, very cool. I visited a few times, and I really liked what I saw. And I believe Shadowfields also has an online presence. What's the web
Very much
address
so.
for that?
Shadowfields.com. It has dozens of videos from Shadowfields, and tour dates and things like that. And
Yeah, you're also on Bandcamp too for Shadowfields.
yes, we are on Bandcamp, and pretty much everywhere. Shadowfields is everywhere.
Okay.
So
I will include, friends, and you'll see the links flash up on the screen. We'll also include those in the description. So be sure and check the description below for each of those. Guys, we're headed toward the end here, and I just want to, before we get to the message from home, the scripture closeout, want to ask really quick, John, Keven, Jeff, Rex, do you all have any closing questions or anything for Tom?
Well, I'll ask one question I haven't asked Tom. What's it like? Because I know you also do production of music too. So what's it like on that side of I mean, I know you did all the production with Damascus stuff, but producing other artists, I know you said you're doing that. You do that as well.
I do a lot of that at this point. I enjoy it. It gives me a chance to keep my skills going and stuff, because it takes a while to write an album, but I want to continuously produce people and use all the gear that I have. God has blessed me with a really great studio full of gear and stuff that I could have never dreamed about when I was a kid. When Damascus was doing those first couple albums, it was literally a single reel-to-reel machine that recorded in stereo, and we just kept playing it until we could play it well enough that was the recording. And now I have all this stuff, and it just, I wish I could go back and do it all over again, but I enjoy working with other people. Heather works with me in the studio as well with producing other people. We've wanted to build a community. That's what this has all been about, is being Christians. Heather and I want to show the love of Christ to other people. And we're gathering these dissimilar people that the only thing that they have in common is Heather and me. And we're able to grow this community, encourage people, help them to become all that they can be. And we always pray that through what we're doing, that they're going to see the love of Christ in what we do.
This CD, I unfortunately did not know of the band back in the day. And this is one reason why I really like Rock's records. I love all three of the companies that put out this music, but Rock's really seems to go a little bit more for like people that maybe never had like a regular release back in the day. I know these were probably released on cassettes. I'm assuming these albums. But I would have never known about this band without knowing them from Rock's records, and John had contacted me too. I know. Oh, that's cool, Keven.
Jeff
I
had
just
it.
want to.
So,
I just
yeah.
want to. I just want to plug like Rock's records, and please get this. Please get this CD set if you like Kansas. Yes, ELO. You will not be disappointed. And I would have never known about the band if it hadn't been for that. So those albums are great, Tom. And thank you so much for joining us today, so we could find out even more about the band for people like me who just didn't know about them back in the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have a. Go ahead.
We owe a lot to Bill. Bill at Rocks. It's incredible.
Can I ask, Tom, what did you use, or what did Rob Caldwell use? Did you have unopened cassettes of the albums that he used to master them again, or do you know what was done there?
I digitized everything from 4-track cassettes and just stereo cassettes that I had in a big cabinet that has everything that I've ever done. I spent weeks and weeks just digitizing them, getting them into the computer, getting them listenable, and then I did the doctoring as much as I could, and then we sent them to Rocks, where they were then mastered at that point.
Cool.
I say I didn't have a question, but I was really mostly curious about the new track. So I was glad that they went that did come up, and because the booklet kind of touches on the history, but knowing the whole details of what you did. And I'm telling you, I listened to this morning in preparation for this, listened to the new album. I'm finding it hard to believe what you came out with what you had to work with. I'm going to go back now and listen to it with a really critical ear, because these don't sound like
A boombox?
boxes. No. I mean,
Trust me, some of those are boombox.
Wow.
I have a hard time thinking the source of that. I mean, you doctored them big time, because it sounds like my thoughts when I first got this and not knowing all the details, I'm thinking, okay, they got back together, drug it out of the closet, and they re-recorded, some stuff. I did see in the picture on the first open of the booklet, there's a bunch of your demo, all your tapes on there, and there is a tape that says demo, and it's got a couple from that album. And I'm like, okay, they might have recorded something back then, maybe only released a couple. Yeah, I didn't know
those were 4-track recordings, and they were literally a demo to show promoters that the three of us, Cliff, Dave, and I, we could go out as a band still without Mark, and we could still sound decent. And so that's what we made that demo for, is just so we could get some more shows.
Well, I just want anybody that, because we get a lot of these things, Rocks and all of the stage labels put out, and it's great. I love archival stuff. I love band stuff. I like when they drag it and they say they drag all this stuff and give it to us. I love these type of things. But just so other people who might have heard your story don't get the wrong impression, this is not boombox demos. There's a lot of that stuff that comes out, and sometimes it's like, it's neat to have, but how often am I going to listen to it? It's nice to have the archived footage, but not in this case. There's nothing on here that sounds like a boombox demo, which, like I said, we've heard. So I'm really shocked in your stories And now, like I said, I'm gonna go back and listen to it and say, can I hear it? Can I hear it? But yeah. So I mean, this is it from start to finish is phenomenal what has been done from the old cassette days to this. And now are there any other songs that we don't? I mean, it says anthology, but it doesn't say. Oh, it does. Complete. Is it?
There's
Do you have
there's
any
only
tracks?
one song that we ever wrote that is not on that
So
anthology.
it's not complete.
Oh, but it's not complete. I want my money back.
I tried to recover this one. It happened before our first before that first EP. There was a song called The March of Magog, which we got blasted over that so many places because obviously it's pulling out of, the whole, you know, anyway, it's prophecy things. And it was an interesting song. And but the recording was so bad. It was a mono recording, a single microphone in a room. I couldn't doctor it enough. And the singing ended like halfway through. And I was like, well, I'm never going to sing that song again.
Our lives are cut by your anger. They fade away like whispers.
Somewhere I had read, were all the guitars on The Keeper played by you,
Yes.
including the solo?
Yes.
That was a smoking solo, man. You were
Oh,
laying
thank you.
some thick stuff down there. I was
Thank
like,
you.
wow, man, this is, friends, it truly is. It's a quality recording, chock full of great stuff. For the price, you can't go wrong. Go to Rock's Records. In fact, go ahead right now. We'll wait. We'll be here when you get back. So no, anyway, great recording. I do want to ask you one other question, Tom, regarding your production. Is there an online presence for you as a producer where people can connect?
They can just reach out to me at Undoubting Thomas. They could Tom at undoubtingthomas.com.
Okay, Tom, I will write that down. Guys, any other questions?
Very good.
Well, Tom McKeown, it's been an honor to have you today. John, it's been an honor to have you. Jeff and Kevin, it's always great to have you guys back. Thank you, everybody. And Tom, if you can make a brief statement to leave a lasting impression with your friends and your fans, what would you wish to tell them?
Don't give up on dreams because God doesn't give up on dreams. God has a plan for us even when things look like they're never going to come together. But God's always working behind the scenes. And I've seen that happen so many times in my life. And there are still some things I'm waiting on. Some relationships that I want to be healed. But God promises that He's going to continue to work in our lives. And so just trusting and resting that God is in control, and that putting your faith and your trust in Jesus. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much. And words of wisdom right there. And so, friends, as you all know, at the end of every episode, we always like to close out with a message from home. It's a portion of God's word. And, Tom, we always like to choose something from scripture that we feel correlates with the band in somehow, or a song from the band. So I chose the song Truth from Will I Find You There, released originally in 1984. And some of the lyrics that you had penned, lay down your life and pick up your cross. Your Savior stands alone. Die to self-will and give him your heart, and all that is true will be known. And the verse of scripture, Tom, that it reminded me of, and actually I couldn't help, but there's two that actually coincide with your lyrics that you penned. And one was from Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And then Matthew 10:39. Whoever finds his own life will lose it, but the person who loses his life for my sake, said Jesus, will find it. And that's what I got out of the verses that you laid down there in truth. And just want to thank you for singing about the truth. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And so, Tom, I'm awfully glad. John, thank you for introducing us to Tom and to Damascus. I'm awfully glad you did, Tom. I really cherish this. And I thank you for the great music with the good news of Christ that's in here, because I thoroughly am enjoying it. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, each of you, for blessing my life.
You bet. You bet. So, guys, we're going to say goodbye to our friends out there, and we'll go ahead and close this out. But before everybody leaves, please just stick around for one more moment, okay? So thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a blessed day. Take care. I will have to edit that. My audio wasn't clicking on. I'll edit that part out right there where I was like, friends, as well, we have a very another. You could have went with Sir Isaac case. But I'm going to edit that out, guys. That was horrible. So,
Nope, it's permanent.
I'm so sorry I did that.